Welcome to the Wounds of the Faithful podcast, brought to you by DSW Ministries. Your host is singer, songwriter, speaker, and domestic violence advocate Diana Winkler. She is passionate about helping survivors in the church heal from domestic violence and abuse and trauma. This podcast is not a substitute for professional counseling or qualified medical help. Now, here is Diana.
Hi there. Welcome. Thanks for being with me today. We have a great show for you today. We're talking about how trauma plays a part in OCD. Very interesting topic, one that I'm not too familiar with, but I've had some exposure to folks that have that debilitating illness. So that will be Peyton Garland is our expert today, and she'll be telling her story. How are you guys doing this week? I'll have to say and mention we got some rain this week. There was a break in the heat. It's just been coming down in buckets the last 2 days, and I don't have to go out and water all those plants tomorrow. I get to sleep in. It's a treat for me. Plants are happy, I'm happy, and it's cooler. I think it's maybe 85 outside. It will be 85 for the next couple of days, so we're super happy about that. What else is going on? Before I introduce our guest today, I'd like to give a shout out to a few people this week that have interacted with me on social media. Ruben has subscribed to our channel on YouTube. Kayla and Timothy A. purchased some music from my store this week. Thank you so much. Enjoy that music, and I appreciate your support of the ministry here. Let's see, Tiffany has subscribed to YouTube, and William, welcome, welcome. I hope that you enjoy the show. So let's introduce our guest for today. Peyton Garland is a writer, wannabe rapper, and coffee shop hopper who loves connecting people to a grace much bigger than expected. Her debut book, Not So By Myself, was promoted by former White House Press Secretary Dana Perino and endorsed by TED Talk speaker and creator of the More Love Letters movement, Hannah Brencher. Peyton is a guest writing coach for the Broadleaf Writers Association and frequent feature on mental health awareness and faith-based products like So OCD, Hope and Anxiety, Everyday Royalty, and You Don't Have to Be Perfect. She lives in Colorado Springs with her husband Josh, JG, and their two gremlin dogs, Elfie and Daisy. Enjoy the conversation that I had with Peyton Garland. Welcome, Peyton Garland, to the show.
Hey, happy to be here. So excited.
Thanks so much for reaching out to me and coming on the show. We have a few things in common. During my interview prep, I loved your interview you did about Fred Rogers' legacy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you
Well,
so much. That was a beautiful experience for sure.
oh man, I love Mr. Rogers. I so miss him.
Me too. That was some good, healthy stuff you could trust to put your kids in front of.
Yes, still. And I did a little bio about you beforehand, and looking forward to getting to know more about your life, your family, and your many talents. Now, I have to ask you,
Yes.
with a name like Peyton, were your parents football fans?
I love that you asked that. I was named after Peyton Manning.
I thought so.
So So my parents are huge University of Tennessee fans. And when I was born, Peyton Manning was still playing for the Vols. So you were exactly right. I was named after Peyton Manning. My middle name's Madison, not quite Manning, but close enough. So
That'd be a little too creepy, right?
just a smidge. So I'm thankful there's some gender variation there. At least I have some sort of a feminine name with the Madison.
Yeah, I'm not a big football fan. I know he's a quarterback.
Right, won the
quarterback?
Super
Okay.
Bowl. At least he went on and did some cool stuff. I can't complain there.
That's all I know about him. I'm not a big follower of football, but well, that's a really interesting fact about you. So, I also found out that you are a fellow green tea connoisseur. Is that right?
I am. So coffee actually makes me sleepy, which is very strange. I don't fully understand why, but tea is more of my go-to because if I drink coffee at 7 or 8 in the morning, I want to go take a nap. So
Wow.
tea is just much better. I love putting honey in my tea. Every now and then I'll sneak some peppermint in my tea. So I think tea's a little more fun to play with. So for
Yeah,
sure, tea.
I have never liked coffee. I don't like the taste, but I've always been a
I
tea
wish I did.
drinker.
I wish I did. I've tried to actually love coffee and be a connoisseur of all the different flavors and roasts, but I'm pretty simple and then I lean toward tea anyway.
Oh, well, let me tell you, I have the tea for you.
All right, let me hear it.
I cannot drink American tea anymore. When I went to France, I've been there twice because my sister is a citizen of France.
Wow.
They have these tea salons, and one of them is called Mariage Frère. And after I tried their tea, I could not drink anything else. I have it shipped from France every time I run out. In the middle of the pandemic, I didn't have toilet paper, but I had tea.
I love that. Yeah, I could totally relate. I studied abroad in Italy while I was in college. And once I had lasagna there, I came home and nothing has quite met the bar since. Totally
Yeah.
relate to that.
Yeah, my ex-husband was Italian, and so he would make everything from scratch, and that is the only way that I can
Oh,
eat
yeah.
lasagna or any other Italian dish. But
So Olive Garden's just a no-go at this point, just a
no,
letdown, right?
no, I don't go to Olive Garden. Sorry, sorry to all you, breadsticks lovers out there, but I think second place would be British tea.
Nice.
British tea is really good. We have an English garden tea house here in Arizona, and it's run by a British gal, and she has a really nice selection of tea. So I buy some of that too.
That's awesome.
But your husband is a pilot, so if
Yes,
he
he
goes
is.
to France, have him pick up
There you
some
go.
tea for you because I think I've seen it at the airport, the Mariage Frère tea, and yeah.
It could save you some shipping costs. So we can definitely work something out.
Half of my luggage is okay. I buy half of my luggage coming home is tea, and the other half is fabric because I'm a sewer.
Smart
I
lady.
buy all of my fabric over there. So yeah, it must be awesome having a husband as a pilot. Do you get to travel to a lot of fun places?
Not right now. So unfortunately, right when he finished flight school, COVID hit about 4 or 5 months
Ugh.
later. So it's been kind of not what we originally expected. But he has rented a plane before and taken me up privately. And that's been a super fun experience. He's great at what he does. So hopefully when things are normal again, if we ever even know what that means or what that looks like, hopefully travel will open back up and he and I can explore a little more.
So am I right? He's with Cathay Pacific?
So so right now, with COVID kind of throwing a wrench in the game plan, he is actually training Air Force pilots right now in Colorado, which is really neat, super cool. But he is a cadet for SkyWest Airlines as well.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
dabbling in some military contracting and then walking onto the airline. So super proud of him. And that's kind of what brought us out here to Colorado was SkyWest. So excited to be out here in the West and experience this beautiful weather.
Yes, awesome. Yeah, I like talking a little bit about fun stuff because my podcast is we talk about some dark topics and I
Sure.
always like to at least have some fun in there.
Sure. Smart move.
Offset the darkness
Right.
sometimes. Um,
Sure.
well, let's dive into your background. Let's talk about your upbringing first. Now,
Yes.
I came from a fundamentalist Baptist background. Now, yours was Southern Baptist, right?
Yes. So it's very it parallels fundamentalism a good bit. So I grew up in Georgia, which is essentially the capital of the Bible Belt. I say that's where the brass was made for the belt of the Bible. And in the South, it's a very brick and mortar church culture. Oftentimes, it is what you see on TV, where your grandmother goes there, your great grandmother went there, the preacher's likely your uncle. So it was, I grew up in that sort of culture where half of the congregation was blood related to me. it was it was a very strict culture. We had one pastor who stepped in, I guess, when I was around 12 or 13, and he quickly turned away from scripture. He was smart about it. It was using scripture to push his own narrative rather than letting scripture speak truth.
Mm.
And so Southern Baptist, I don't even know if that's what you would call it. It all, I'll be honest, after I stepped away from that church after about 7 or 8 years of sitting up under it, I heard lots of people from the outside looking in describe it as a cult, just point blank.
I've
It,
heard
it
that
had become a
before.
it had become very manipulative, but it was sneaky. And I think that's why people called it a cult, is you're putting Bible verses out there. And so people just start nodding their head because you think, oh, the guy behind the pulpit just quoted David. He knows what he's talking about. And the next thing you know, or the next thing I knew, I was almost afraid of God. I loved him because I was told to love him, but I was scared to like God, if that makes
Mhm.
any sort of sense. Like love felt
Yes.
like the obligation, but I felt like I couldn't follow through with liking him. Like he didn't seem like someone I would get coffee with if he was on earth
Mm.
today. And
Wow.
like I said, I sat under that for a long time. And so that was my childhood growing up in church. And I was also a Christian school kid. And I went to a very strict Christian school. And so it was just rule after rule after rule. And there was so much of God being judge that I really missed out on grace for a long time.
Oh, yeah, I'm so familiar with that. I mean, you went through the whole, not wearing pants and the
Oh
King James
yes.
only
I
and
mean, it's funny because as you get older, and I guess when you get away from that culture and you start doing your own research, it's amazing the simple facts you missed. Like I was honestly told verbatim that anyone who read anything other than King James was a heretic. Don't
Mhm.
believe a word they say. And once I started studying the history of why the King James Bible was written, it was a monarchy who just wanted his name stamped on a Bible. And then I
Yep.
kept reading and diving in, and I said, wait a minute, there was the Tyndale version before this, there was the Wycliffe, there was the Geneva. This was not like Jesus physically wrote the King James
I
Bible and handed it to the world.
know. Yeah.
It's just so many things where you're like, what? How did I miss this? But when you're in that culture and you're in that community and you're so deep into it, especially when you're like me and your whole family's in it, you truly believe everyone else is wrong.
Yeah. My previous guest that was on the show, Will Hess, he is from the same kind of a background, and he's an apologetics preacher, and he has a podcast called The Church Split, and he went into great lengths to talk about those subjects. Also, the other one we talked about was wine.
Yep.
That you
Yep.
shouldn't drink. Let it drink, and the grape
Jesus drank
juice.
grape juice. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole
Bingo.
thing, and
Oh yeah.
and I was drinking the Kool-Aid too for a
Right.
long
There you go.
time. I think I had a better a better relationship with God. I had a good relationship with God, at least in my mind, but I definitely did the whole wanting to please the people around me and follow the
Right.
rules as much as possible because I wanted people to like me. But
Yeah.
when I got out of it too, I was like, I need to really dive into this to see, is this really what I believe? I'm not talking about the fundamentals of the faith. I'm talking
Right.
about all these extra things that aren't really in the Bible.
No, you're totally right. My apologetics teacher when I was in high school, I'm surprised they let her work at the school because she was covered in tattoos. I don't know how many piercings she had. Her hair was like this purple color, but I loved her. I loved her, and I think that's why. I think she showed up loving Jesus and not fitting this mold that everyone forced on her. But we were reading Understanding the Times. It's an apologetics course. And she was talking to us about something that I will never forget. And it was Christianity is not what you don't do, it's what you do. So you not drinking, you not sleeping around, you not, that's not Christianity. When Christ came, it was more about serving, what you were doing for the other person, who you were loving, who you were pursuing. And so that's totally where I'm at now that I'm several years removed from that crazy culture. Not that there's still not rules and not that God didn't put them there for us to walk in holiness and to honestly save us some heartache.
Mm-hmm.
But it is so much more about who you're loving and who you're giving grace to rather than you just not doing X, Y, and Z. You're missing out on a whole nother half of the faith if you don't focus on what you should be doing instead of just, hey, I didn't do this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And being an abuse survivor, I've had to find out the hard way as to, who God really is and how does he
Mhm.
see me? He sees me as a precious child of God and he loves me for who I am and not what I'm doing.
Right,
On the outside, he died on the cross for me and so I can have an abundant life. And
right.
found out even more grace when I got out of my abusive relationship.
Mm,
So very thankful for that. Now
absolutely.
let's talk about your OCD experience. So you're our OCD expert today. I'm glad to
Okay.
have you talk about this topic because most people only have a reference of OCD from TV shows, like
Sure.
Monk. I love
Right.
Howie Mandel. I mean, he's famous for not shaking hands and not touching doorknobs,
Right.
Love him to pieces. I mean, I have a joke about being OCD about something or insisting that something be done a certain way, but
Sure.
that isn't the same as the debilitating mental illness, is it?
Right. No, exactly. So, and Monk, he has one of the four branches of OCD, which is called Contamination OCD. And you can have one branch, you can have two branches. I personally have all four of them. Lucky me. So there's Contamination OCD. There's Harm OCD, where you're afraid if there's a knife on the kitchen counter, like what if you accidentally stab the dog, or what if you stab the baby behind you, or if you're driving down the road, what if you ran somebody off the road and you don't know it? Do you need to turn your car around to check on them? So that's harm. So that's just
Oh,
one of the four
wow.
branches along with contamination. Then there is also mental thoughts and taboo rituals. So that's another one. It's also known as religious OCD. So my strongest one is religious OCD. And so what that means is, I guess before I dive in too deep, I'll explain the physical science, because once you talk about the physical science of it, it's not just the symmetry OCD, which is the fourth one, where it's, oh, everything has to be clean. I have to straighten all the picture frames. There has to be an even number of napkins on the table. So the physical science of all four of these branches is my adrenaline glands, when fight or flight kicks in, like when you have a thought that you don't like and you can just kind of shake it off and say, oh, that was weird, or that's not me. With people with OCD, your adrenaline glands react to that thought and your body physically experiences the fight or flight. So the heart rate goes up, the head feels kind of dizzy, and you're in a panic mode. And you can't let go of the idea that that thought may or may not be true. And then what happens with people with OCD is their neuron transmitters fire faster than the average brain. You have a thought you don't want, like, what if I ran somebody off the road? My heart will start racing, my head will start spinning, and you have these neuron transmitters going, hey, that might be real. Hey, we might have a problem. Hey, you probably should be scared. Hey, your brain might be right about that. And it's just this constant mental exhaustion. And it is very debilitating. So I have a friend of mine who lives in Britain. I do have a friend overseas. She spends an average of 6 to 8 hours in the day, not at night, in her bed, because getting out of bed with OCD is that intimidating and that's scary for her. It can physically keep people in the bed. It's what drove me to seek Christian counseling and therapy. And the reason OCD can crop up so quickly is it tends to be genetic. So it's something you're usually born with. But a traumatic experience, typically in children, will trigger it. And my church culture, all the rules, constantly living in fear that I wasn't pleasing God, truly afraid I was going to hell because I didn't say the prayer the right way at the right time. Did it have to be in front of people? Was it supposed to be by myself? Religion triggered my OCD. And so that's why religious OCD is what's so prominent in my life. So you hate to say it this way, but church abuse, spiritual abuse literally triggered a mental disorder. So it took me a few years to work through not having bitterness with the church, for separating my experience from every other church. And that's something that I have to, I talk a lot about giving grace and getting grace, and I have to do the same for church now. I can't label every church as a spiritually abusive campus.
That's really fascinating. I never really knew anybody that knew that much about the things that happen inside your body when you have a trigger. Now, how does it compare with PTSD or like a phobia? What's the difference?
Oh, yeah, so my dad is, he served in the military for 24 years. He is an Army and Navy vet. He did 2 branches. He has PTSD. And so with PTSD, the triggers work the same, but typically with PTSD, the triggers actually remind you of a specific experience that truly happened. OCD thrives off of a what if sort of thing. So what if I did run somebody off the road? Well, it didn't happen, but your brain thought there might be a 0.5% of a possibility you could have harmed somebody, hence harm OCD. So you need to check on it. So the difference is that, and it's also in the compulsion part of OCD. So OCD stands for Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. So if you think you've ran someone off the road, the compulsion is let me turn around my car and go check and make sure nothing happens. PTSD doesn't necessarily have a compulsion. Now, both PTSD and OCD can trigger anxiety. They can trigger depression. But PTSD typically doesn't follow a physical compulsion where your brain's like, hey, you've got to react this specific way or the thought won't stop. So it's kind of the response mechanism that's a little bit different.
So what about a phobia?
Ooh, phobias, for me personally, phobias are almost separate from OCD because for me, you'll laugh, my biggest phobia truly is spiders and going blind.
Spiders. I hate them.
So I don't do well with spiders, and I don't do well with heights. But my biggest fears by far are spiders and going blind. I just like being able to see things, but none of those are attached to a what if in such a way where I feel like I would have a compulsion. So sure, there's that, well, what if I go blind? But until I think it's something that's immediately impacting my present reality, OCD typically doesn't attach to it, because there was a huge spider in my dresser drawer last week, and I just went and grabbed the Raid, and I just like drowned the Joker. Like he was not gonna stay in this house with me. That was not
burn the house down.
Right. So with phobias, oftentimes, because the fear can typically be compressed pretty quickly, like kill the spider, or go, hey, Peyton, you're not going blind, you're fine. OCD usually doesn't respond to those things as quickly, which is nice because I'd hate to see a combination of OCD and spiders. I don't think I really wouldn't handle that one well.
Have you? Well, we're in Arizona, so we have critters.
Gross.
Okay,
Yes,
we have spiders,
yeah.
sister. Have you met a scorpion before?
I have, and one ended up
Scorpions
in my
are horrible.
kitchen sink. I don't know if it came up through the drain,
Yeah,
but
they
I've
usually
had one
do.
in my kitchen sink, and I will tell you that was scarier than a spider. I don't know if it was the pincher. I don't know if it's just we don't
Oh
see those as
no,
often,
the
but that
stingers.
was that was bad.
Well, I think that now that they've been in our house, I mean, I've had them in my shower, I've had them in the kitchen, I've had them
No.
in my office. I found one in my garden last week. I went in there to to check on my garden, and I saw a scorpion in my worm bin, and I freaked out because I almost put my hand in there without a glove on,
Right.
and I have
Ooh.
experienced enough with ants and spiders and stuff to not do that. But I wouldn't say it's a phobia because I do the same thing you did. I kill the scorpion,
Right.
or I call my husband to go kill it. But I will not. If I get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, I cannot walk to the bathroom without putting on my flip-flops because I know that they're awake at night, and I know they've crawled around in the bedroom before. And I have my phone with the flashlight, and I have my
Right.
flip-flops looking at the ground while I'm going to the bathroom because I've never been stung. I've lived here since I was a child, and I've never been stung before, but I'm sure there's going to be a first time at the.
But you don't want to find out. So
Oh
better safe
no.
than sorry.
I've got glue traps, I've got diatomaceous earth around, I've got fly swatters in every room, I've got bug spray. So I'm almost bordering on that phobia of
But
bugs.
you're prepared. We can,
I'm
you can
prepared.
respect the phobia with your preparation for
But I
sure.
hate those things. So yeah.
Totally relate.
Everybody listening is probably like, I'm gonna sign off now. They're talking about bugs. uh, well, let's talk about when was the first time that you experienced OCD behavior? When did you remember noticing it?
It's funny because I didn't know what it was until I was about 25 and my therapist was walking me through what compulsions typically look like. And I went, oh, that's been my whole life. Okay. Honestly, the first few vivid memories I have is when I was about 4 or 5. I couldn't get a single stain on a shirt. Even if I spilled water on my shirt as a child, I changed my clothes. My mom said on average, I went through about 4 sets of clothes a day. So that was kind of the symmetry OCD of everything needs to be neat and tidy, and there's an order to things. If I took 2 steps with my right leg, I had to take 2 steps with my left leg. There had to be a sense of balance, which is your symmetry. So that's kind of what picked up first
Wow.
because, at 4 or 5, I was blessed, around 4 or 5 that I didn't fully understand what was going on in the church. So there wasn't really anything else my brain could thwart or warp or manipulate. So probably by about the time I was 8 or 9, a classmate of mine, who was a grade or two older than me, passed away with complications from the flu. It was just one of those one-off.
Ooh.
His liver shut down. That triggered contamination OCD. As a child, I didn't understand that he passed away because his liver shut down. I thought it was just germs. I thought germs just killed people. And so at about 8 or 9, I quickly developed contamination OCD where I washed my hands a lot. I thought children with birthmarks had some disease and I could catch their birthmarks. I would never play with my friends who had birthmarks because I was terrified I would contract something from them. But by about 12 or 13 is definitely when the religious OCD kicked on, because that's when I was just getting old enough to fully comprehend what was going on within the church. And so OCD kind of knows what's most important to you in each life phase. And unfortunately, it's just quite the monster that way, that it tends to manipulate whatever is not only in front of you and not what you're just experiencing, but what you value. So for me, I valued Jesus and I loved him and I wanted to like him, but I was just terrified too because of the way my church presented him. And so my brain and my spirit were totally at war for a good 7 or 8 years.
Well, people that listen to my show, they know that I believe that spiritual abuse is probably one of the worst abuses, because it does affect your relationship with God and how you see him and how you react to him. Because if you don't want anything to do with God, or you have this warped perception of God, I mean, that's your salvation. That's your eternity we're talking about.
Right. And it affects other things. So for me, it was emotionally, my relationships with people. Trust was not something I gave out easily. It's not something I received well. I didn't give a lot of grace because I didn't get a lot of grace from the church. And so it impacted my daily relationships with friends. It impacted my emotional health. I was always uptight and I was very stressed to be a 12 or 13-year-old child. Like in some ways, the church definitely stole pieces of my childhood, the church that I grew up in. Physically, it affects you. When I'm stressed, I don't eat well. Sometimes I don't eat at all. I forget to eat because my brain is so focused and so stressed. And so you feel that, I think, when, like what you said, when the spiritual and when your relationship with God is warped and it's off kilter, your whole life is unbalanced. It truly impacts each other aspect of your day-to-day life.
Wow, that is just, I can't imagine. I can't imagine. I'm so sorry that you had to go through all that.
Thank you.
So let's talk about the dating thing, because you waited until you were married to have sex, and a lot of us make that decision to wait. And so how did that work with your OCD? I'm curious.
Yeah, great question. So with harm OCD, it also, you're afraid you might physically harm people, you're afraid you might sexually harm people. It's the whole gamut. And so what happened is my husband was fantastic. And when I told him when we first started dating, hey, this is something I don't want to do until after I'm married, he was a true gentleman. He was a champ. We held each other accountable. What I'm not to say it was easy, because I have a very attractive husband and he is wonderful in so many ways. But after I got married and then sex was now part of my life, it was just one more thing OCD could take and run with. It was just another thing to obsess over, because here's what breaks my heart. The church typically idolizes purity culture to the point where so many women think if they've lost their virginity, they're just done. I mean, in youth groups and behind the pulpit. And again, sex is meant to be within the bounds of marriage. That's a consummation, that's a vow, and that's a beautiful thing. And that's why I think it's that way. But we have idolized purity over literally a relationship with God.
Yes.
Like your purity and your soul's worth is based on your virginity. And as a married woman, I still struggle to this day. I've been married for 3.5 years with feeling guilty for having sex within the biblical confines of marriage, because sex was seen as something so bad, because no one wanted to talk about the good. No one wanted to say, hey, this is a blessing from God. This is a way that you can celebrate with your husband something special that you can't celebrate with anyone else. And so OCD just took that and ran with it. And so that's something to this day. And I have other friends of mine who grew up in the church who say the exact same thing of, I have a friend of mine who said, I've been married. I think she's been married for 12 years. And she said she has just now gotten to the point where she feels like in some way, shape, or form, it's not wrong for her to have sex with her husband, because the church puts so much pressure on women and so much of their self-worth solely on sexual purity.
Well, I think sexual purity has gone so far as to they don't touch or kiss, or they're never alone together. And so they go from 0 to it's the wedding night, and okay, you're married, and now you are commanded to have sex. And so and you're just looking at each other like, what do we do now? Or there was
Exactly. Thank
no
you.
no
Nobody talks
real
about
sex ed. I mean, except the premarital counseling where you listen to those, what was it, Ed Wheat?
it. Or those
Ed
terrible
Wheat.
slideshows in
Oh.
high school where they just showed you what STDs looked like. Like there was nobody was giving me a healthy look into this whatsoever.
No, I had a normal teenage life. I was raised Catholic, and I did not go into the Baptist church till I was 18 by my own choice. But I did not wait, to be honest and transparent.
Sure.
But when I rededicated my life and got saved, in a genuine fashion, I practiced what is called secondary virginity, and I thought I had a pretty good, healthy view of sex and didn't have any weird beliefs. But the people that I had dated some people that, um, let's see, I dated a guy that was 40 years old, and he was a virgin, and he was Southern Baptist, youth pastor. And now I found out the reason why he was still single. He had a serious aversion to bodily fluids. Like, he would not open
Oh,
mouth
buddy.
kiss. In fact, I was his first kiss. He came to visit me, for a date, and he gave me a birthday present. It was my birthday, and I said, "Oh, can I give you a kiss as a thank you?" And I mean, he didn't even know how to tilt his head, and
I bet that
and
was
I
a
didn't
fun
know at the
experience.
time that I was his first kiss. But I mean, I was very honored I was his first kiss. But
Right.
I tried to kiss him later, and it was just kind of awkward. And then he told me, and we had these conversations like, okay, he wanted to have lots of kids. He loved kids. That's why he was a youth pastor. And I kept asking him, now how are you going to have kids when you have this issue with body fluids? I didn't know if he had realized that sex is messy. And well, maybe you
Like
could
this.
address that part of it. The periods, the pregnancy, the hugs, the kisses.
Right. But the stork definitely doesn't bring the children. Like
Yeah.
have to
So
figure something else out.
how do you deal with that? The whole, okay, sex is messy with OCD.
That
Okay.
actually that does not bother me. And I think it's because I guess it's a sad thing in a way is the different forms of OCD take different weight and different pressure. And so they steal the forefront of my brain. And so for me, what weighs out the most is still whether or not me as a married woman having sex, whether or not that is something that is religiously and morally right. So it's like that form of my brain, that part of
Hmm.
OCD is still at the forefront. And that is what I deal with the most. So definitely not fun. Except that, yes.
What about, well, you don't have any children, right?
I do not. I have two dogs who
You
are
have dogs.
so they consume so much of my life, and they're so terrible that they're a good way for me to say, hey, yeah, not yet. Because
Yeah.
when they get on my nerves, I can at least put them in a kennel and leave for a little bit. I can't put children in a kennel and leave.
I'm in a
So,
playpen.
right,
You can take him to
right.
grandma's.
There you go.
Sure you can. I don't have any children either. I'm a dog mom, but my dog, a German Shepherd, he passed away 2 years ago. In fact, I
Oh,
was
I'm
just,
so sorry.
Facebook just put those pictures up on our
Oh, the
timeline. and
memories are the worst. Yeah.
and he died of cancer very suddenly. And so we loved him to death, but he was
They're your babies.
messy. I could never keep the house clean. The dog hair and the slobber everywhere. So
Oh, I
how do you
sweep constantly. I
how do you
just sweep.
I mean,
They're honestly, I definitely wouldn't say they're quote unquote service dogs because they're not, but they are so good for my brain. Like
hmm,
my dogs are so loving, and they also require they're they are needy dogs by choice, and they're so needy. They want to go out, they want to play, they want to love on me, that it honestly gives my brain something healthy to focus on. And so they're messy, so I end up sweeping a million times a day. But the good they do for me mentally, it far outweighs it.
That is so awesome. I mean, I totally agree. The power of dogs and animals. I mean, I'm a huge animal lover. I keep telling my husband, because we like sci-fi movies. And if I had to go back in time, I would be a veterinarian instead of I'm in the pharmacy industry. So I
told
missed my
Josh that last
calling.
week. I told Josh that. I said I would so be a vet if I could go back, except I don't think I could emotionally let things go. Like if I had a puppy who died on the table on my watch as a vet, I would just like, my soul would just be ripped out, and I don't think I could ever recover
That
from
is
the trauma.
exactly. That's why I didn't go into being a vet tech. I went into be a pharmacy tech because as much as I loved animals, I had all kinds of animals growing up. I could not bear to having to put a dog to sleep
Oh no,
every
no.
day. There would be no way. I mean, my dog died and several of my pets died, and it is traumatic.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, I can't. I ugly cry. I don't
Oh my
do well in those
goodness.
situations. So the last thing you want is me holding a scalpel trying to save your dog's life.
Oh yeah, we could talk all day about how wonderful dogs are and how they just have a way of transcending so many barriers in our life, and they're so valuable. I mean, yeah, I understand they're not children, but they definitely
Right.
are gifts from God for
They are
sure.
beautiful. They're beautiful communicators. They don't have to say a word, but animals communicate 20 times better than people, in my opinion.
Yes. So we haven't had I guess we haven't healed long enough to get another dog.
Sure.
We'd be very, very picky because our bear was like the perfect dog and everybody loved him. And but I kind of wonder if my husband would have an easier time because he's ill and he's
Mm,
going through a little bit of discouragement, and bear would have been a super big help for him um,
sure.
during the pandemic as well as his illness,
Yeah,
because
my
they were
dad who
like,
has yeah, my dad with PTSD. My parents have a dog who's paralyzed from the waist down. She's a little pug dachshund mix, so she's this weird looking thing. She can't walk, but that is my dad's baby. I was at their house a few months ago, and I heard my dad say, "I love you, baby," and I said, "Oh, I love you too, Dad." And he literally said, "No, I was talking to Maggie." And I said, "Oh, okay, my bad. I forgot that was your
gee,
child." So yeah,
thanks,
they
Dad.
right. They are wonderful for sure. They know when we need some extra love.
Yeah, so right now with being a caregiver, and I have a garden and I have the podcast and I have my small groups and I have a full-time job, and a dog is just another thing to care for. As
Sure.
wonderful as they are, I can't add another thing to my list of
I totally understand
responsibilities.
that.
So, but I'm looking out there for the
Perfect dog.
perfect dog
2.0.
that will come into our life eventually. How has OCD affected your faith now? I mean, you obviously have come through so much, but I mean, what's your faith like right now with the OCD? I mean, you're coping with it and stuff.
The first time I visited a therapist, I wanted a Christian therapist because I wanted more than the science. I wanted, like we've talked about, I wanted the faith behind how to heal. And the very first thing my therapist said, Karen looked at me and said, "I am so sorry, but I just want you to know beforehand, there is no magic pill for OCD. With mental disorders like schizophrenia and bipolar, there actually is a pill that when you take it, it quite literally can just fix things. Now, granted, you have
Yeah.
to stay on the pill, but it does fix it. With OCD, there is no poof, it's done. There's no hands-on therapy that just makes it go away. There's quite literally no cure for it. And that's what she was saying is until God just blesses scientists with his own miracle, we're just going to have to work through this day by day. Now, there's medicine that can kind of let your adrenaline glands slow down a little bit and hopefully slow down those neuron transmitters. But the thoughts and the fear is just something that you will have to embrace as part of your day-to-day life. And hearing that was not fun, but it was truth. And what you need is truth. That is the only way to heal, is to actually know what you're working with. And I think she and I did lots of very heavy, called brain spotting therapy, lots of brain spotting therapy for about 3 or 4 months. And on the other side of that, where I saw things spiritually, as far as OCD and Jesus and me, and how the 3 of us were going to function for however long I'm on this earth, I have to look at OCD as my thorn in my side. You know, Paul talks about his thorn in his side. No one, people have guessed what they thought it was. They're not quite sure what it was. But when Paul's talking about his thorn in his side, that's where that famous verse comes from, that when I'm weak, then I am strong. God's power is made perfect in my weakness. And that's when you can boast all the more in his goodness and grace. And so the way I see OCD is it's my thorn in the side, but I can also choose to believe that even with thorns, there's roses. So even though I have a thorn in the side, there can be blooms. There can be beautiful things that grow. There is hope on the other side of the thorns. And so that's where my faith is with OCD. I've just accepted that this is that one thing that will keep me humble. It's the one thing that will remind me I'm human and I'm not God and he is God. It's the one thing where I will constantly have to lean on him for grace. And if that means that I learn to give grace to others because that I constantly have to get it myself, it's hard to say it, but it's worth it. So it's just my thorn in the side that I'm praying blooms over time.
And it's really hard.
Sure.
It is super hard. I mean, I'm in a really good place with the Lord right now, with coming through my abuse and some of the trials I'm going through right now. I have a really great relationship with God, but it's really hard when we have somebody that we love or care about with OCD, and we don't know what to do. We don't know what to say. And how can we help somebody that we care about that has OCD?
I'm so thankful. Thank you for asking that. No one ever asks that. I appreciate you. My husband would be cheering you on if he could have just heard that question.
Yay!
It's funny because the number one thing a therapist will say is when I want to have a compulsion, when I'm afraid a thought is true, you're supposed to do the very opposite and not follow through with a compulsion. Do not turn your car around. Do not wash your hands because you touched a doorknob. Don't give into the compulsion because it'll feed the thought. So it's this constant cycle, and that's why your adrenaline glands can't chill out. That's why the neuron transmitters keep going. And so for someone with OCD, if they confide in you that they just have this thought they can't shake and they always feel the need to wash their hands or to turn the car around, or they have to pray, they have to drop what they're doing and pray a prayer of forgiveness immediately, or they're going to hell. The best thing you can honestly do is look at people with OCD and you say 2 things. You say, hey, number 1, you are okay. Because we don't believe we're okay, because in our brain, we're having a total meltdown. We think we're the worst Christian ever, the worst driver ever, we're the most contaminated human ever. We're always thinking the worst about ourselves. So if you say, hey, you're okay, and hey, you are good, I believe in you, God believes in you. If you will just say those 2 things of, hey, you're okay, and hey, I believe in you because you're good, because God believes in you, it kind of reiterates to the brain that, hey, this really wild thought is not a Peyton thought. It's just a wild thought. And once your brain recognizes that, you just kind of breathe, you kind of relax. Yeah. And then you go, okay, we're good. We're good because someone else said, hey, you're good. You're okay. And so it really is that simple, and it makes a world of difference when my husband speaks that truth to me, when my mom speaks that truth to me. So you can always help someone with OCD. You don't have to have anything fancy. If you can say, hey, you're okay, hey, you're good, then all is well.
And we can all do those two things that you
Right.
mentioned. So you don't have to have you know, a degree or
Exactly.
an
No PhD
expert.
required. Sure.
Right. You mentioned your husband. He sounds like such a supportive husband. What has he had to do to adjust with your illness and making a home together?
Yes. I'm glad you asked that. So with seeking therapy, so I didn't realize I had OCD, and I also didn't realize it was so bad until his piloting career first took off. So right before COVID, when he just finished all his licensing and his hours, he was working in an airport that was 8 hours away from home because that was the only airport available. So before COVID, when everybody was flying, things were moving, you went to whatever airport was available. That was your home base, and that just was what it was.
Mhm.
And so when he was away and I was all by myself, my brain, it got real quiet at home, so my brain got real loud. So that's when I first went into therapy, because I wasn't handling being married but feeling like I was single, being cooped up in a house all by myself. So he was stationed at that airport for about 4 months before one opened up locally, and he could come home. And he came home to me trying to kind of coach him into to be my at-home therapist. So he had to learn a lot about physically, kind of like what I told you, physically what was going on in my brain. There was a lot of teaching, me being the teacher, him being the student, but also him turning around and actively learning how to support me and doing it so well. So the biggest adjustment for him was definitely just having to be a student and dealing with my bad days when I was emotionally exhausted because I was mentally tired, just
Mhm.
learning a lot of patience. And he's really been fantastic. He's my buddy. And I think, you hear people call a marriage, a partnership. And I didn't fully understand the idea of a true partnership, of walking in sync step by step with someone until this.
Oh yeah, at least a healthy marriage is a
Right.
partnership, not a
Absolutely.
dictatorship and a doormat. It's a
Right.
true partnership. So let's swing to the other side of the pendulum here, just for fun.
Sure.
What not to say to somebody with OCD?
I am so OCD. I hear that all the time, where someone says, I am so OCD, and they follow it with something like, I just have to have my car clean. I cannot get in my car when it's not clean. I am so OCD because I have to have all my pencils lined up, color coordinated on my desk every day. It's you can definitely have an obsession with cleanliness and organization, because that is an obsession, and I totally get that. But it's the C in OCD that separates someone with a disorder and someone with not a disorder. When you feel like you have to straighten up the pencils as if your life depends on it, as if like you can physically feel yourself not being able to breathe, you feel like you've got to sit down because you're dizzy, then we're talking about a compulsion. And that's when things are like, when I'm like, okay, yeah, you might have the disorder, welcome to the club, have fun. but when someone just likes to be a neat freak, you're just a neat freak, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a neat freak. OCD attaches to that a little bit, but
Don't
what I
call it
typically
OCD.
right, what I typically say is like, hey, until you're afraid you're running people off the road, um, or until you're literally afraid you're going to hell every 2 seconds of the day because you just have a bad thought, or you're really in the mood to punch somebody in traffic, like until you reach that point where it's truly an identity crisis and your body's physically responding to that, you probably just like things in order. So I'm so OCD it's probably our least favorite, because people like me diagnosed with OCD, I don't walk around saying I'm so OCD. Because I hear it enough in my brain, and it's not fun. So it's not something I'm just going to want to casually parallel to color coordinating clothes in my closet.
I'm guilty of saying that, so I'm going to
Oh, I
stop
know. No,
saying that.
no.
I'm gonna stop saying that because you're right. That isn't
I know. I appreciate you being vulnerable enough to ask. Our community of OCD people, it affects 1.5% of the population, so there's not a ton of us. But we're very thankful when people take the time to understand where we're coming from, and then they respect it. That means a lot.
When obviously we probably shouldn't say, well, just don't do that. Don't think that. Don't wash your hands.
Yes.
Just stop it.
It doesn't help. Truly, when you just say, hey, you know what? You're okay. You're okay. That works wonders. But you telling me, hey, don't wash your hands, my brain's response is, I'm in a global pandemic and I don't want to kill my grandmother. I'm going to wash my hands. Like, the OCD part of your brain runs faster than any logic anybody could provide. So coming to the table with logic doesn't really work when your brain's already in fight or flight mode, because people don't think logically in fight or flight mode. So if you just say, hey, you're okay, you're good, God's got this, God's got you, we do so much better. The response, it truly is a game changer.
I mean, how do you tell somebody that you are OCD? I mean, do you have some way of telling somebody so they don't trigger you?
Right. Yeah. So there's some conversations that are easier to edge into, you know, in church culture, when people are sharing their testimony or talking about what they're learning from God, it's very easy for me to say, hey, you know, I'm finding grace in my mental health and that journey with God. I was diagnosed with OCD. So in certain scenarios and certain communities, it's very easy to open up. It is very hard when someone does not understand, where it's not already a comfortable conversation. But people in your circle who truly care. I have a very dear friend of mine at work. When maybe 2 or 3 months into COVID, our office went back temporarily and then went, hey, this is not a good idea, go back home. I had a very dear friend of mine. I told her before we went back into work, I said, hey, I found out I have contamination OCD. I'm not doing okay coming back into work. Like, door handles are making me panic. If anyone even sounds like they're coughing, I'm truly just internalizing all of it. And that girl, she's my best friend to this day. She truly waited on me anytime I was with her, and she opened every door for me. She took the stairs with me instead of the elevator, so we weren't cramped up. And so as hard as it is, with people in your corner, you know, will really support you. It can be as simple as, hey, I'm about to walk into this scenario. I'm not comfortable because I have OCD and this is what triggers me. If you could really help me and maybe kind of be my barrier, that would mean so much to me.
And you always get that little old lady or people that are huggers. And I mean, how do you tell them, you know, I'm not a hugger, I'm sorry, or I do the fist bump.
It's one of those things where, again, in Southern culture, it's just what you hugged everybody. People wanted to shake your hand. I just kept an arsenal of Germex in my car, and I just embraced the hug for the 2 seconds that it existed, and I would just walk away and just immediately, to be honest, I'd come home and change my clothes and likely shower, but I would douse myself in Germex when I got
that Lysol spray in your purse.
Oh yes. I have different brands that I like, different sizes, spray versus foam versus gel. There's an art to it in my world of the sanitizing.
I do all that when I go traveling on an airplane, even before.
I don't blame you.
Even before COVID, I wiped.
I was to say, no, everything. Airports were gross long before COVID was a thing.
I think if airplanes and airlines were cleaning those planes like they were supposed to, they probably wouldn't have spread the disease as much as it had spread.
Right.
But now
I completely agree. 100%.
So every time we would go overseas, we would both get a cold or a flu.
Yep.
And it's, you know, even though we had our flu shots and stuff, we'd go over there and somebody would be in the subway, because we would take the metro all over Europe. And
you always get near that one guy, like out of the thousands of people you could sit one by. There's always that person.
One guy that looks sick, and we did the first time we were in Paris. We got into this crowded car, and my husband whispers to me, "That girl over there, she looks really like death warmed over. We're gonna get sick, aren't we? And I'm like, yeah. A week later, I was sick, and then he got sick. But yeah, I'm a
Not fun.
little bit careful with my husband now because
Right.
he doesn't have an immune system right now.
Mm,
He's on this drug that it's an immunosuppressant, and so he doesn't like to wear masks. But I told him when we went to Costco, or my parents took us to Costco, and he didn't want to wear the mask because it was so hot in the Costco. And I said, you have to.
sure.
There's you don't have an immune system, and even just a plain common cold. Forget COVID. You come home, or
Right.
I come home with a cold, or you know, touch
Yeah.
something that somebody had a cold virus, that will put you in the hospital.
Right. Yeah.
Okay,
I completely understand that for
and
sure.
my oldest brother died in December from COVID in the
Oh, I'm
hospital.
so sorry.
He had other health issues. He was a kidney recipient, kidney
Mm,
transplant. But yeah, I'd like, you know, that's probably what I say. I'm guilty of saying OCD about cleanliness now because I have
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
him
Yeah.
that I have to care for, and
Lots of overthinking that you might not have had to do outside of
yeah.
pandemic. Sure.
So, but that's fascinating about the things
Yeah.
that you have to go through. I've had people in my small groups that were married to people with contamination OCD, and they, you know, I didn't know what to tell them or how to deal with it,
Sure.
but they were exhausted. I knew that.
Oh yeah, for sure. 100%.
Now let's leave the folks with some hope with living this disease. What are the treatments out there, or the coping mechanisms that you can give folks?
So I wrote a book about a year ago called Not So By Myself, and I dive a lot into my journey through mental health and what that looked like in light of church trauma, in light of my husband being gone. So I dive a lot into it there. But one chapter, I literally focus on the concept that silence is not strength. I think I have three great uncles. All three went overseas from Vietnam. All three came back home with severe PTSD. And my family slowly adopted this concept that silence is strength. Don't talk about what you've been through. Don't talk about what you're going through. Don't let people see your weak spot. It leaves you wide open. But there's so much power that I think God gives us in vulnerability and admitting our weaknesses and admitting where we're not okay. Because when we admit it, there's opportunity for healing. And so the first thing I tell people is, I'm not saying you've got to run to a therapist's office. I know a lot of people struggle with that feeling taboo, or they don't want to talk to a stranger. And those are things I totally understand. But I am a big proponent of get it off your chest. If you're mentally compartmentalizing something, your body is physically taking a toll, your spirit is taking a toll, and your overall health is just not where it should be. And so my number one thing is silence is not strength, whether it's your spouse or someone at church you trust, or it is a Christian. I totally recommend Christian therapy. I'm a big proponent. Find a way to talk about it. If you're wary of medication, you're not sure you want to be on it, if medication honestly feels like you're failing at not getting a grip on it, that's totally normal. I felt the same way. But ask lots of questions. Don't be afraid to talk to a clinical therapist or your doctor about medication options. And a lot of people just say, pray your way through something like this. And you just saying, hey, God, take away my OCD. That's not, that's not typically how it works. And so then I tell people, let your prayer life be very open and raw and honest. Don't just say, hey, God, take away this OCD. Feel free to walk him through everything your brain has went through that day. He already knows what you've went through anyway. Tell him when you're frustrated with it, when you're sad with it, when you're mad with it, when your pride's taken a blow because of it. And just let it be a time for you to be open with not just the therapist and not just the person at your church or your spouse, but with your God too. I found a lot of healing and a lot of grace when I could have open, honest conversation with God about my mental health, especially growing up in the church I did, where I was afraid to even talk to God. So don't underestimate very vulnerable prayers and people you can trust.
But it's well, we talk a lot about, not stuffing here, and I don't know if it was the same in your church, but in our church, they didn't talk about mental health, and they went as far as to say if you were depressed, or if you had anxiety, or if you had any kind of physical ailment, or especially mental health issues, that you didn't have enough faith, or you just need to pray and read the Bible more, and then it will go away.
Right. No, I grew up in the same thing. Nobody talked about it. And I think that's why I'm almost passionate about explaining the physical side of what's going on, because nobody questions the diabetic who goes to the doctor because their pancreas isn't working. Nobody questions the person with the cholesterol levels that are unbalanced, so they go to the doctor and get medications, make sure the blood's flowing well. Same thing with mental health. It's literally the brain. It's a different organ, and it is not working like it should. And it needs medicine just like the pancreas, just like the heart, just like any other organ. Unfortunately, because the brain is kind of the powerhouse that sends all the messages to all parts of your body, it just impacts people in a different, often more open way. And so that, I totally agree with you. The church has been pretty silent on it, and no one's willing to say, hey, we recognize this as a physical disorder. This is not a direct parallel to you not having enough faith or you not walking the walk.
Yeah, thank you for addressing that, because
Absolutely.
I know a lot of people watching and listening to us have those very fears that I'm not good
Right.
enough for God, or I have this, I'm not perfect. I don't have a
Right.
perfect body. I'm somehow broken, and God doesn't love me as much. So I'm glad that you have that encouragement for our folks today.
Sure.
I've heard of EMDR.
Yeah.
Mixing up those alphabet soup there. I know it's really great for trauma survivors. Is it effective for OCD?
Yes. So that is, EMDR is very effective. It's pretty much a form of brain spotting. They're quite literally the same thing. So what happens is you physically pin a point in the room. So you lock eyes on a point in the room where you almost can feel alleviated a little bit. For me, I always draw to natural light. If there's a window or it's sunny, my eyes always go to the light spot. And you start with your immediate need, with why you're in the therapist's office that day, the exact thing that's triggered you, the exact thing that's bothering you. And what happens is, while you're gazed on something that is very healthy and has calmed your body down, you start talking through that one trigger. And what happens, and it happens to me every time, the therapist leads you in conversation that walks you back to the very root of the trigger. Because often it's not the trigger itself, it's the root cause of the trigger. What made the trigger a trigger?
Yes.
And when you can walk your way back to, oh, that was the root, the trigger loses a lot of its power, because it's no longer the trigger. It's, hey, here's the actual problem. Here's it. Oh, there was church trauma. Oh, there was, you lived with your father who had PTSD and it was undiagnosed for a few years. Oh, you had a classmate who died of the flu. Like, oh, okay, now we can address the actual problem. And so now the triggers don't hold as much weight. And in fact, the triggers diminish over time. They slow down.
Wow. That's awesome that we have that now.
Right, for sure.
We didn't have these kind of therapies, 20 years ago, I don't think.
No. OCD hasn't even been an actual thing, but for a few decades. It is not old in society. It's not old in science.
Now, tell the folks how they can get hold of your resources, connect with you, and please give the person who's watching and listening to us today, going through a dark spot right now, give them your best advice.
Sure. What I like to tell people, because it's what I wish I would have told myself years ago, especially when I was about 13 and I was afraid to like God is whatever picture you have of God, think of the very best thing about him. Even if you're skeptical of him, even if you're mad at him, think of the best thing about him you can muster where you are. And I promise you, he is 100 times better than that. And then think of you. Think of the best part of you, even if you're mad at yourself, even if you don't like yourself, if you're experiencing shame and guilt. Think of that one thing about you that you do like, and God sees you in 100 times the light of that very thing. So you are seeing the grace and goodness of God, and he's turning around and giving you that grace. So just that reflection of how good God is, but also the flip side is how good he sees you. And when you can just remind yourself of that, when you're not liking yourself and when you're honestly not liking God, when you can just reinforce goodness and grace, I'm not saying it makes the situation better because that's usually not how it works, but it gives your soul a lot of peace. And when your soul can breathe, you can at least see the situation as something to work through rather than the situation working all over you. So that's what I like to tell people. I encourage people to check out my book, Not So By Myself. It's on Amazon. That's probably going to be the quickest way for you to get it. And I have a website. It's peytongarland.me. And there you can check out more about my book, my blog. I have some links to my social media there. I have I call it the Chitty Chat tab, where you can send me a message. We can get on Zoom over coffee or tea and talk about anything. Because I believe that we're here to connect to people, and that's only going to come when we're vulnerable and honest and open with creating community. So
Amen.
Again, PeytonGarland.me. If you want to come chit chat, you're more than welcome.
Wow, this has been so fantastic. You've offered so much.
I've had a blast.
So much valuable content for the folks, and I've learned a lot, and we had fun. I mean, even talking about a difficult topic. I am definitely going to have all of the links in the show notes for everybody. And thank you so much for being on the show today.
Absolutely. Honored to be here.
So for everybody listening, as always, I want to end the show with, you are no longer a victim. You are victorious. God bless you. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Wounds of the Faithful podcast. If this episode has been helpful to you, please hit the subscribe button and tell a friend. You can connect with us at dswministries.org, where you'll find our blog along with our Facebook, Twitter, and our YouTube channel links. Hope to see you next week.